Hello, everybody. How are you doing today? Just giving a couple of minutes so we can have other colleagues joining us.
So Tomo's fan is in India and he was with us yesterday and today he's in Mumbai. So he should be joining from his hotel room, actually.
Thank you, Anil.
Thank you.
Yeah, just one more minute and I start. Welcome, everybody. Hello. Nice to see you all again here. Let's keep the energy up for Vincent and for Fabrizio today, and for Roger. It's going to be joining us, Tomo.
So sorry to be late. Actually, I just
Yeah,
came to
just one
my
more
room,
minute and I
common room.
start.
Thank you so much.
Welcome, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Hello. Nice to see you all again here.
Anil-san, thank you so much.
Keep the energy up
Vincent,
for Vincent and for Fabrizio today, and for Roger. It's going to be joining us, Tomo.
So sorry to be late. Actually, I just
Yeah, just one more minute and I start.
Thank you so much.
Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Hello. Nice to see you all again here.
Anil-san, thank you so much.
Keep the energy up.
Vincent,
Are you all listening to me and Tomo talking on the loop, or is just me?
No, yes, we are able to listen to Tomo, but before that, your voice was echoing.
Yeah, right?
Yes, your voice was echoing.
There was a little bit of a loop there.
Hello, everyone. So for those that are co-hosting, if you could keep your microphones on mute until you're able to speak, that'll be very helpful. Thank you, everyone.
I will start now. Yeah. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you guys, even like us today, a part of the organization as well. We are in totally different time zones, so it's very interesting again to be sharing all this knowledge with people from all over the world. And thank you all for being here. Welcome to our 8th session already. Wow. Yeah, let's see what we have for today. Namshi, let's just go through a couple of slides. You already know me. I'm Fernanda Corsi, the MC of the course for this year, and I'm also the Executive Director for the Institute for Sustainability Leadership at IESE. And today we also have a guest from IESE sharing with you guys. Briefly going to some house rules that you are already aware of, but let's just go through them very fast. Please remember to name your name accordingly to what you can see here on the screen, your affiliation, your school, underline your name, as such mine here, yes, underline Fernanda Corsi. Please keep your mics on mute, but your cameras on so we can see your faces most of the time if possible. About last session, hopefully all of you guys were here, or most of you were here present with us. So we had the speaker Nitin Paranchap, the chair of the Hindustan Unilever, and also former chief transformation officer and chief people officer of Unilever Limitada. We also had Suzanne Puveter, the CEO and CSO of IKEA India. And they were both discussing with Professor Jean-François Manzoni, the former president and professor of leadership and organizational development at IMD, and all this incredible session facilitated by our friend Anil Sachdev, the founder and CEO, Grow Talent Company Limited, and also the founder of School of Inspired Leadership, the Soil in India. And let's go through a couple of points from last session just to refresh our minds a little bit. So, first one of them. When organizations invest time to facilitate conversations on what matters to people and encourage employees to take responsibility for living this purpose, they increase both well-being and performance. Every employee has talent and can act as a leader of work, relationships, and impact. Remember, the session last week was about companies and their relationships with their employees. Yeah? Okay. If we wish to manifest our dreams and aspirations, we need to practice the path of aware, care, and dare. Be the change we seek in the world. This is a famous sentence from Gandhi. And another one, it takes a long time to build. Trust organizations that value their employees. Do not take knee-jerk reactions in times of adversity. And instead, they involve their employees to discover ways of overcoming challenges. Let's think about our companies right now, the environments where you're at, like what are all these relationships, how are they established? Another one is if the ideas of a truly humanistic organization appear utopian, it is because we are discussing the future of capitalism and not getting limited by the current state of businesses. Is it possible? No? How can we think of a capitalism that is different? It's, especially in this case, companies that will take their employees as potential partners, no, and real talent beyond the daily work that they provide. And we must not make the mistake of thinking about caring versus performance. Extreme caring means we must find ways of tapping into human potential to serve the needs of all stakeholders. Great message. I hope that it helped refresh what we talked about. And the ones that did not participate, please watch the recordings. And next, Namji, and today we will have Professor Roger Levermore, a senior strategy advisor, former dean, and vice president of the Asian Institute of Technology in Thailand. Professor, I'm going to read a very short biography so people can know you, okay? Professor Roger Levermore was the dean and associate professor of management practice at the Asian Institute of Technology in Thailand. He was educated in the UK and South Africa and has taught and researched on a range of subjects, including leadership, strategy, ethics, and sports management. He has led MBA programs in the UK from 2005 to 2010 and in Hong Kong, 2012 to 2019. Prior to joining AIT, Professor Levermore worked at Chinese University of Hong Kong 2018 to 2019 and the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology from 2012 to 2018. I hope I didn't miss any super important detail, but he's going to introduce himself now as well to you guys. Welcome, Roger. We're very excited to have you here today facilitating our session, and I leave you in great hands, you all. Roger, welcome.
Thank you so much, Fernanda, and welcome to everybody this evening from Bangkok. Real pleasure to go through and be the person who helps facilitate today's session. The introduction, perfect. It was included so much that over the last 20 years. If we could maybe move on to the agenda for today and to look at the two speakers. So I'll be introducing Vincent Stanley. We're incredibly lucky to be able to go through and have somebody who's got 4 decades of experience looking at the type of philosophy and the type of issues that this course has touched upon over these last 8 sessions or so. So we'll be hearing from Vincent for the significant amount of time for the session today. And then that will be followed by a discussant session led by Professor Fabrizio Ferrero. So I'll be introducing you to Vincent and Fabrizio before each of those sessions. But if we can move on to the next slide, this gives us a little bit more of an idea about what the focus will be for the next 2.15 hours. And that is looking at the potential philosophies for a new era and thinking about the role that business education plays within the potential philosophies that get us focusing on how the world might be looking in 20, 30, 40 years' time. given the context of today's world and all of the geopolitical issues that are taking place, we take a step back. Last 10, 15, 20 years, the amount of social media focus, the amount of traditional media focus on the negative impacts that companies, businesses have got through things like pollution, through all sorts of issues to do with labor, discrimination, all of those social media and traditional media focus for people that have got very little power to influence the way that organizations have had these negative externalities through their operations. So trying to shift the philosophy to some extent is incredible to those stakeholders and to many others as well. So what I'm interested to go through and hear today is really about those key challenges. What are the key challenges that senior leadership have trying to go through and consider how philosophies might change to some extent in the new era? And that new era feels a bit shaky from time to time for various reasons. What are the qualities, what are the actions that are required from business leaders to try to overcome those obstacles? And if we were to almost start from scratch, what kind of sustainable, inclusive philosophy would be useful for the remaining 80 years? So what might those frameworks look like? And I'm looking forward to Vincent and the discussant, Professor Fabrizio, talking about these type of issues. If you can go to the next slide. So this is the agenda for the next 2 hours. We will go through and have a 40-minute presentation by Vincent, and then I'll be asking the audience to provide their questions. Following that, there will be a survey that will be led by Professor Fabrizio that gets you to go through and think about the role of business education and the changing philosophies that might be required, and how do business schools try to put that into their curriculum. That will be followed by comments by Vincent and by Fabrizio, and then we'll have a panel discussion for the remaining 35 minutes before we wrap up at the end of today's session. And then just a few moments to go through and introduce Vincent to you. So looking through Vincent's bio, looking at the video that led to the pre-reading for today's session, the highlights to me are that Vincent's been working in this area for over 4 decades. I'm intrigued by the title that he held at Patagonia as Chief Storyteller. I believe that's based partly on his background as a poet and writer. He has written books that have reviewed the successes and the philosophy of Patagonia, which includes The Responsible Company. He's also worked on a range of initiatives at Patagonia, which includes Our Footprint, Wornwear, Patagonia Books. And at the moment, I believe that Vincent is a resident fellow at the Yale Center for Business and the Environment and a guest lecturer at different universities, including Fordham University. So this is a very brief introduction to the keynote speaker. I'd like to go through without further ado and ask Vincent to go through and provide a 40-minute talk to everybody here tonight. Thank you, Vincent. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for being here. I'm very conscious when I speak, especially to an international audience, that I have very limited experience. It may go over a long time, 52 years now since we started Patagonia, but my experience is fairly narrow. And it is with this company, both as an executive for much of the time, as sales manager or head of marketing, but also as Roger mentioned, as a storyteller, and for the last 10 years as director of philosophy, which is a title we conferred on me because I teach company values and ethics to employees in seminar sessions about and to really focus on some of the questions that you raised on the first and second slides. Patagonia has certain kinds of lessons we've learned, which I'll talk about in this session. We've developed a set of values and guidelines, but how do those play out? How do those values play out in the working day? That's the big question. How do they become more than a plaque on the wall or more than a principle? So I'm conscious of the limitations of what I know, and I want to be, I also want to be useful to you. Knowing that you're from very different places and engaged in different activities. And I think I'd like to kind of raise at the outset some of the questions I raised. I run a seminar at Yale for the Center for Business and the Environment. That's actually, the students are drawn from the divinity, the environmental, and the schools of management. So they're all graduate students. We also get law students and people from public health. But the purpose of the seminar is to talk about what are going to be the major issues in your working life. And how do you, over the next, say, I'm concluding 50 years of working. The students are going to be going on to 30 to 40 to 50 years of working. What are going to be the major issues, but also how do you see yourselves in the picture? What concerns you? What takes advantage of your particular strengths and talents? Where do you want to put your time? And so that becomes the heart of this monthly seminar that we have at Yale. But it's also a question, it's interesting because these are the questions for the students. It's also kind of the purpose of the group that they form friendships for life. And that may also be something that students in this program might be doing, because you're talking about doing business in a different way and in a way that isn't necessarily firmly established. But it's also, these are also questions, excuse me, that I ask myself almost every year. What are the major issues in work today? How do I see myself in the picture? Where can I contribute? So I would offer the same question for the faculty and for anybody else in this program who's not early in their career. There's a quote that I often start a talk with that really struck me very strongly when I came across it about 15 or 20 years ago, long after I'd started at Patagonia. And it's from Alden Leopold, who was the first great American land conservationist. And the quote, he says, "A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community." And by biotic community, he meant everything. He meant the human community as a part of the natural world. And the thing that struck me at the time is that almost everything we do to make a living tends to disrupt the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community, of the human community and the natural world. And that we've been doing this for a long time, since the beginning of agriculture, but we've been doing it really intensively for the past 200 years, since the Industrial Revolution, and extraordinarily intensely during the past 50 years. So the world population has quadrupled in my lifetime. It's doubled in my working lifetime since 1970. And since 1970, the population, in addition to doubling, we've had an increase in wealth of 5 to 10 times what we had in 1970 in terms of the amount of trade involved. And all of this has combined to put extraordinary stresses on the natural world. It's very different from when I started at Patagonia. I remember this was the early 70s, and the kind of environmental problems we had 50 years ago are very different from those today. They were primarily of urban air and water. So in the United States, the famous Cuyahoga River in Cleveland used to catch on fire regularly because of the chemicals in the water, and so regularly that the paper stopped putting it on the front page. The air in Los Angeles was so bad in the summertime that if I drove into town from where I lived 70 miles away, I could count on my eyes watering when I got out of the car. That was just what you would expect. And my favorite disaster story of that time was that you could actually develop film in Lake Ontario. You develop black and white film by dipping the roll into the water. The chemicals were close enough to those needed to develop the pictures. So you get an image. So in much of the developed world, very important laws were passed in Japan and in Europe and in the United States to protect urban air and water, to take the lead out of gasoline. But what people did not figure on in the early 1970s would be the pressures that would develop over the last half century. And these include, of course, climate change, emissions that are from primarily from carbon dioxide and methane that are basically cooking the atmosphere, and that those emissions also falling into the ocean would acidify the oceans, which actually threatens the food chain, that we would be drawing down ancient aquifers of water that have been full for millennia and are now drawn down to dangerously low levels, that what we would do to grow our food, to feed all our people, would that the fertilizers would run off, create algae blooms in the rivers and kill the fish. All of this has resulted in an impoverishment of the natural world. It's also resulted in very unequal, dangerously unequal wealth in the world, both between countries, between nations, and within nations. We see this all over. And a lot of the populism and the nationalism that has developed is so evident in the United States right now, but all over much of the world, is in response partly to a social situation in which the wealth is so concentrated in few hands, with the prospects that people feel for the future being more diminished than they have in the past. So we've got populism, we've got high levels of migration, high levels of civil unrest, and we have, at the same time, we have a world that is more connected than it has ever been. Pope Francis, in an encyclical that he issued in 2015 called Laudato Si, on Care of Our Common Home, spoke of the world we face. He said it looks like two crises, social and environmental. But in fact, what we face is one crisis with two sides, one social, one environmental. And he talked about the crisis of inequality, but he also described the Mother Earth as the poorest of the poor. So going back to my Aldo Leopold quote about the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community, I think we've reached the point where we can no longer make our living in a way that threatens that stability and integrity, or even the beauty of it. we really have to figure out a way. It will be in this century, and probably we need to figure it out within the next 20 years. And my experience at Patagonia over the past 50 years has been that it is possible to successfully create products and offer services while keeping in mind this essential fact that we are part of nature. We're not the masters of nature. It's not our servant. We must realize that this is not an anthropocentric world in some way. So I want to tell you a little story to kind of indicate this. But actually, first I want to talk a little bit about. Roger mentioned that Imal Shenard and I had written a book called The Responsible Company, and we also wrote another book called The Future of the Responsible Company recently. And when we talked about the responsible company, we did not mean to actually describe Patagonia as the poster child for that. We were using the word responsible in a very decided way. There's a lot of talk in the US and in Europe and now in Asia about sustainability as a field. And sustainability is a word that we use because it's convenient. But we don't like to describe our company that way. And we actually don't like to describe the activity of trying to become more sustainable using that word. And this is the reason that there's the implication is that if you have a sustainability department or you're engaged in more sustainable activities, that you're actually giving back to nature as much as you're taking, that you're giving back to human communities as much as you're extracting. And it's not true. Patagonia, for a good part of our history now, for 40 years, we've really worked hard to minimize the harms we create in the course of doing business. But there's almost nothing we do that actually gives back to nature as much as we take. So we can't be sustainable yet. We don't know how to do that, but we can be responsible. And the word is key. There's a wonderful quote from a Haisla leader, an indigenous leader in Western Canada, named Gerald Amos, who says the most important right we have is the right to be responsible. And I think this is for all of us who are interested in doing business differently, this is kind of a key quote, because what it says is that responsibility is not a burden. Although it can be. It's not necessarily a burden. It's not something you do when you're not having fun. Responsibility is the heart of human agency. And when you don't feel that you have the right to act responsibly at work or in your community, that is a tremendous degradation of the human spirit and of our capabilities as human beings. So I want to just tell one story that kind of illustrates how we got down on the path that we're on now. So we started out not as a clothing company, but as a company of making mountain climbing equipment. Imal Shenard was a teenager and was doing these big wall climbs in Yosemite in the late 1950s. And none of the climbing equipment that was then imported from Europe was suitable for these long climbs with very long rock faces. So he started to make the equipment in his backyard. And after 15 or so years, about the time I came into the company, he started to import and then have clothing made with the Patagonia name. And the idea of starting the business was to actually pay for the climbing equipment company. We had about 70% of the world market. and we're making 1% a year. So it was not a business that offered a lot of stability for the future. So the idea of getting into clothing was actually to be our irresponsible business. It was because of climbing equipment, you don't make good, better, best. Your customers are trusting their lives to the quality of your gear. Clothing is a little different story. But I think as we got into the clothing business, the habits we had from making climbing gear of making high quality goods, of making things that were pursuing an aesthetic of form follows function, all of that was present. It created a kind of discipline that we couldn't pursue the activities that an ordinary sportswear company might. We couldn't make poor quality goods because it wasn't in the it wasn't in the habits of the owner or the key people working for him. And there was also a tradition from the middle 80s on, because climbers and surfers who made up the initial workforce of Patagonia had a strong connection to the natural world. There's something that happens when you get a mile or kilometer away from the road. The way you experience life changes. So you're both more vulnerable to natural forces, and at the same time you feel more self-reliant. And climbers had noticed the environmental degradation that we were talking about before those of us who worked in the cities did. I mean, you'd go back to Kilimanjaro after 2 years and notice that the glaciers were retreating. If you were a fly fisherman in the mountains, you notice that there were fewer fish and a smaller size. If you're a surfer, you go back to a break and find that it had been developed. So we had this strong feeling, and people who have that experience also develop a desire to protect those places. So from the early to mid 1980s, we were giving 1% of sales to grassroots environmental organizations who were working to save a particular forest or a stretch of water. But we really didn't question our own actions. For one thing, we never made clothes. We designed them and we spec'd them and we chose the colors, but we brought them to assembly factories that we didn't own. And those factories would order the cotton from the commodity market. They would get the fabric from the mills. So we really didn't know how to make clothes, and we really didn't know what went on in the manufacture of clothing. And the key incident for us was in 1988, we opened up a store in Boston using the latest low VOC paints and recycled materials, all of that. But after 3 days, our employees started to call in sick. Headaches, stomach aches. We called in an environmental engineer to see what was going on. And he said, oh, he fixed the problem. We said, what was the agent that caused people to get sick? He said that was formaldehyde off gassing from the cotton clothes in their basement. Now, this was instructive for us because we'd been dealing with iron and steel at that point for 35 years. We'd been, half of our clothes came out of an oil well, still do in terms of polyester and nylon. And we had thought of cotton as this benign natural fiber. And it turned out, we commissioned a study of the major fibers we use, and it turned out that cotton was the most environmentally harmful. And not because of the formaldehyde, which is a stabilizing agent, but because of the intensive use of chemicals used to grow cotton. The organophosphates that are used to prepare the plants were developed as nerve gases for World War II. And the more we looked at this, the more we looked for a solution. Was there an alternative? And I think that that's also been the key to our development is we make a change. We often make a very difficult change, but it has to be something that where we can actually do something about it. And what happened with cotton is we knew that organic cotton was still being grown in California. It was still being grown in Texas, being grown in India and China, Turkey. And organic cotton didn't use chemicals. So we went through a process and we decided that within 18 months, we're going to make the change. We're going to get out. We're not going to use conventional cotton. We're going to switch to organic. And if it doesn't succeed, we'll be out of the sportswear business. And sportswear was about a third of all of the products we produced. So we ended up buying most of the organic cotton being grown in California and learned how to pray for rain because we wouldn't have produced any shirts if the rain didn't fall that year. And but we thought we'd done our homework, but we hadn't, because what happened is when we ordered the cotton from the farmers, we broke our connection to the global supply chain, to the spinners who turn the fiber into yarn, to the mills who turn the yarn into fabric. And when we went to Bangkok or other places to find a spinner who would work with organic cotton, they all told us, well, we hate this stuff. It comes up our machines. It's too costly to use. And at the same time, we started to have a revolt among our employees. It was fairly gentle revolt, but they're saying, listen, I've got to do everything I did last season. Got to design the clothes, spec them, color them, take them to the major customers. And on top of that, you want me to find an entire new infrastructure for making cotton clothes. I've got to raise my prices 10% on everything I sell because organic cotton is more expensive, and not a single customer has ever asked for this. So why are we the martyrs? Why us? And the people who are working on this, the more they learned, the more they felt that we were doing the right thing, the more Elon and Melinda, the owners of the company, were convinced that they didn't want to pursue any other way. So what we ended up doing is taking our employees, about 40 at a time, in buses to the Central Valley in California where the cotton was being grown. And the first thing we noticed when we got into cotton growing country was the smell, because it smelled like an uncontrolled laboratory. The second thing you notice is that there were in the conventional fields, there were no birds. They wouldn't go near those fields. And then if you stopped and you dug your hand in the soil, there was no life in it. It wasn't soil, it was dirt. I mean, it takes worms, there's worms 5 years to come back after you stop spraying. There's no vegetation. And at the end of the day, we would take our employees to an organic farm, which didn't smell like an uncontrolled chemical plant. There were birds, there was life in the soil. And people would come back from that and they'd say, what the company is doing is a royal thing, but we're doing the right thing and we're going to help make it happen. And that program of taking all our employees out, including, wasn't just the designers, it was also the accountants and the childcare folks and the salespeople, et cetera, really shifted us to, because we made it happen. We had to cut our margins in the first 2 years. We lost some sales. We had to cut them out of the line. But after 2 years, we recovered. If we had treated this as an investment rather than a risk, it would have been a very successful investment. Because after that time, not only did we recover sales and margin, but we got new customers and we garnished our reputation on the basis of what we had done. And this became kind of and if you're a runner, you want to improve your time. If you're a surfer, you want to surf a bigger wave. If you're tackling environmental problems or you're tackling labor problems in the supply chain and you can do it successfully, you want to go on to the next thing. And so that has been the spirit in which the company has operated since then. I want to talk a little bit about as I mentioned, that we don't like the word sustainable, but we got into the food business in a fairly small way about 10 years ago, and we learned some pretty important lessons from that. And when we got into the food business, we were essentially creating food that people who go into the mountains can carry in their pack. But we also just started to learn how the food systems work and more about agriculture. And we formed a friendship with a man named Wes Jackson, who runs an institute in Salina, Kansas. And Wes is in his 80s now, but his life work has been to restore the Great Plains to health. And the Great Plains, which run across Middle America, were among the most fertile places in the world for 100 years, with topsoil that ran several meters thick, and now it's down to a few inches, like every other place. And so he was telling us, he said he had developed this perennial wheatgrass with roots that go down about 3 meters into the ground. And when you get roots that deep, they can break up the microbes and fungi that actually create topsoil faster than nature can on its own, quite a bit faster. And that when you do that, when you develop the health of the soil, it needs far less water, and it needs far fewer inputs, even organic inputs to the nitrogen, the phosphorus, et cetera, to help things grow. So he described this to us, and he said that it was a kernza he had developed. And we said, "Oh, this is great. Where can we get some?" And he said, "Oh, you can't buy kernza." And we said, "Why not?" He said, "I can't get any farmer to grow it." We said, "Why not?" He says, "I can't get a farmer to grow what they can't sell." So what we ended up doing is contracting with a brewery in Portland, Oregon, to make an ale that used kernza as an ingredient. And we got the first 100 hectares of kernza planted in Minnesota. And now there are several thousand hectares being grown, because we've interested cereal companies who use it as do a little carbon farming. They use it as an ingredient in their products. And what we discovered with this is that it was possible to, this was real sustainability. We were giving back to the earth more than we were taking, because we were helping to build soil. And what it taught us was that if you want to be sustainable in business, you really have to be regenerative. You have to engage in some activity that is reviving or sustaining and bringing back the health of the world and also of human community. So that was our biggest lesson there. And I think one of the things that we come to at this point, and when we think about the next 20 years or the next 30 years for our company, and also for all the businesses involved in the B Corp movement or other companies that want to both operate with responsibility to all of their stakeholders, but also operate with a particular purpose, that there's kind of a minimum of what business can do and a maximum. And the minimum is that business needs to be cleaning up after ourselves. We can no longer just sort of privatize profits and socialize the costs, which has been the tradition for a long time. So if we, if you're in the cement industry, if you're in the oil industry, if you're in the apparel industry or the food industry, business has a responsibility to know what harms it creates and to help to alleviate them, to help solve them. But the second thing is what we learned from provisions, because after a while, we started to look at the strategy a little differently. So rather than just look at, okay, what's popular right now? What are people interested in? We said, how can we create every product that we create and solve a problem in the food system or in agriculture? And this, I think, is where business can really shine in comparison to civil society and in comparison to government, because we can create financially sustainable activities that actually help to bring back the world to a point where we're actually supporting the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community, including human beings. And I think I would like to kind of stop there, and we can start with our discussion. I think that this movement of business is really extraordinary. Bruno Latour had a great line, which is that we're traveling faster and faster to a place we can't land. And that is, I think, that that's the role of every sector of society, to figure out how are we going to have a soft landing given the direction and the speed that we've been going, and the place that we land, is that going to be a place where we want to live and can thrive? With that.
Thank you ever so much, Vincent. And we now have 30 minutes for questions from the audience. I can see there's one or two comments which have come into the chat box as you've been presenting. So maybe I could just go straight away just to go through and reflect on some of those comments, stroke questions, and also take any questions. There actually is a hand raised, so maybe we go straight to the hand that's raised, and that is Luis. Fernando, would you like to go through and go first, please?
Thanks, Roger and Vincent, for the talk. I have a question about the ownership structure of Patagonia and what you can tell us about that. What type of profiles, I don't know if you can tell us about this, are the people that are on the board of the trust and the collective? Who gets the right to be on the trust and on the collective? And how is it? Do you think this model can scale to SMEs, family-owned businesses, startups, and other businesses?
Good question. Well, it has. I mean, there are a lot of Novo Nordisk is owned by a trust. Zeiss has been owned by a trust since 1889. There's a long tradition in Europe of companies owned by trusts, not always by purpose trusts, but they're owned by nonprofit entities. In Patagonia's case, we didn't change the board, so the board that the stock was closely held by the Chenards and their two adult children. They donated all of that stock to the Purpose Trust and Holdfast Collective. The Purpose Trust has all the voting rights, and the Holdfast Collective distributes the shareholder dividends. There was very little. It's been you didn't ask that question, but for others who might have that, there's been very little change in the operation of the company due to the change in the ownership, because we still function the same way. We have the same CEO. Patagonia itself still gives 1% of sales to environmental organizations, and the Holdfast Collective does large scale land purchases or engages in large scale projects. We have not had what might in in other places be regarded as a progressive board. I mean, we don't have anything like the German system of having 40% of the board seats that belong to the employees. So we haven't done anything innovative yet in terms of the board operation, but we have the families on the board and also several independent directors.
Is it the same board for both, for the trust and the collective?
Yeah.
Thanks.
And for the company. Yeah.
Thank you very much. If we move on, I'll keep with the people who've got their hands raised, and then we can go to the chat box in a moment. But Sebastian, you're next.
Hi, Vincent. Yes, Sebastian. I live in Munich, so close to the Alps in Europe. And I also enjoy going there. So thanks for your passionate talk. As you have a quite long legacy in this job and experience, so I would wonder, or my question would be, do you think over the 40 years, I think you're working there, or 50 years, the consciousness about environmental change, climate change, has improved, has gotten worse? Has it been in waves? That you say in the 70s, there was a big initiative, and then it dropped, and now again, and it dropped. What do you think about that? Maybe worldwide and also in the US, I would be curious about to hear.
Yeah.
And one more thing, do you think the legislation has improved, or the legislation in that term? I mean, you said in Europe it's better than in Germany, but what do you think about that?
Yeah. I've forgotten, I just read the figures, but it's something like 80% in Europe of people believe that climate change is real and active, and there's something like 60% in the United States, and that's heavily divided among, like 90% of Democrats and 20% of Republicans. One of the things I think that we've done is we make sure that the products we produce perform well for their intended purpose. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is to make them in an environmentally and socially responsible way. And we do that partly because we know that people don't buy a raincoat because they want to save the planet. They buy a raincoat to keep themselves dry, and then they might buy one from us because they respect our practices. So that's kind of key to our strategy. So we don't want to rely on the kind of passing interests of the fluctuations in how important people consider the environment. We consider it absolutely critical all the time, and not just climate change, but also the loss of biodiversity. In some ways, we can make our way through the climate crisis and still lose the planet if we destroy the web of life. So, in answer to your question, it's always central for us. We don't make that as we all have an active education campaign in terms of books and films that we produce, but we don't rely on that absolutely for our business. The products themselves have to work for their intended use. And
So
legislation.
you were talking about Patagonia, but I meant the society in general. Do you think it improved, or do you think it's gotten worse?
No. Well, I'm in the United States, which is very depressing answer to your question right now, because so much being reversed. I do think everybody gets stung these days by floods, fires, the results of climate change. Farmers know that they have to plant at a different time, so that becomes overwhelming after a while. I think we're in a period of denial, which is very different from saying, okay, we don't have a problem. Now we know we have a problem, but we don't want to do anything about it.
Thank you very much. We'll move on, I think, to Dapo Bankole. Over to you.
Thank you. All right. Just My question, thank you for that. My question is a bit, I don't know, should I say personal? But, I think it's good to talk about it still. Now, it's easy. I think it's easy to talk about the decisions we make around being environmentally responsible, making all those kind of decisions. What I'm more interested in is the process, how you got there as a person, because I think this speaks to your value as an individual. When you had a challenge in your organization and you had all that leakage and all that, and you had to make changes and you made a commitment, it's not something that somebody will just wake up and just decide. Like, that's you. Like, there are values that guide your decisions, that guide your actions. So I guess my question is, how did you get there?
Yeah.
What informed that process for you, and how can we scale that? Like, it's a societal crisis. You understand what I mean? How do we pass that down to other people?
Yeah.
This is one forum by which we're doing that. But anyway, I just think that everything that happens in the society starts from somewhere. The individual comes from somewhere. I have an idea, but I'm really curious to know how you've gotten there as a person, how you are making sure that that becomes a legacy, right? As an individual for the future. And similar to somebody in the chat, I had the same thoughts that when we talk about sustainability and all these things, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's when you're in survival mode, it's a different thing entirely. You don't worry about something else, all these kind of things. It's a fact. Now, what percentage of the world actually has conquered, hunger, has conquered their physical needs before we start talking about, I'm worried about cutting down trees, or I'm worried about the kind of clothes I wear, I'm worried about where the clothes I wear come from. Anyway, a mixed bag of things. I'm sure you know where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Well, let me answer the first question. I take it we've got two questions. One is how does an organization work with these values? How does the values spread in an organization so that that's the first one. And the second one is about the unequal development and the whether people who are in a situation of hunger and depredation can worry about the environment.
Yeah.
So in the first instance, I think it made a real difference that Yvon Chouinard was just strongly committed. He started as a climber. He's the owner of the company. He was willing to think in a way that other people didn't allow themselves to think in business, including me. I was a sales manager, and my evolution. My first thought as a sales manager was, how do I increase the sales, or how do I find the customers? What kind of products do we need? And I remember when we came up with the first mission statement, build the best product, cause no unnecessary harm, use business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. I thought, oh, this is highly aspirational language. It doesn't have much to do with what my daily task is. I've got to get the inventory out the door. But what I found was there were a couple of things. The more work we did, the more I felt that belonged to me as well as to the company. And the second thing that made a difference is I saw that first mission statement it wasn't just a plaque on the wall. I saw my colleagues start to ask themselves, how do I make this work in my daily life? How do I change the way I make clothes and sell them in order to live up to this? So that after 15 years, this highly aspirational language, which wasn't true for the most part. I mean, we did make the best product, but we didn't we caused quite a lot of harm. We didn't even know about that. We hadn't made the switch to organic cotton, and we certainly hadn't been approached other businesses at that point. But we started to do all of that. We started to inhabit that kind of moral field. And it's not, it may start with an individual, but it becomes imbued in the culture. And when it's imbued in the culture, it takes on a strength that that really has kept us going. You know, people say, how do you instill this? For the most part, what I see is people want to bring their best values to work. They don't want to leave them at the door when they go to work. And what we're doing when we're at our best is to take advantage of the best that's in our people, and to support that rather than punishing. And in terms of the second question, which I think is really important, you know, one of the things that industrialization and the whole process of modernity has done is it disrupted every other system that came before it. So, and then we've also developed a system where the developed nations have kind of sold a story to other parts of the world, saying you have to, this is the process you go through. You're gonna, you know, it creates desire for Las Vegas or Abu Dhabi or whatever, and I think kind of distracts people from what they really care about in their basic lives, which would be their family, their community, the opportunities that they have in their life. So I think we've created kind of a false picture of what the stages of development are, and there may be ways in which we develop communities in which people thrive, but they're not necessarily the path that the West has pursued. You're all going to know a lot more about that than I do, but that's my sense, and that would be the argument, I think, of, you know, Vandana Shiva or people, others who have said, no, let's look at what we know in the places we live. Let's protect those places. Let's create a good life there, and let's not be Mar-a-Lago.
That's a good way to end it. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you so much. Next up, I think we have Altaf. You next, please.
Okay. Hi, thank you. At Patagonia, you have redefined responsible business through regeneration and your ownership model. What do you see as the next frontier? Especially, how can companies collaborate with government, communities, or even their competitors to tackle issues like climate migration and biodiversity?
Yeah. Well, I think there are several ways. One is we helped start a couple of industry associations that looked at that evaluated the impact of the activities of that industry. But I think what's more important, and it's coming, will be very important in the next 20 years, is circularity. And the reason is that, you know, one company's waste becomes another company's feedstock. You're creating a new kind of economy of scale. Also, this kind of business is place-based in some ways. So I visited a couple of years ago a group of businesses in Halifax, Nova Scotia, that were within 10 or 15 miles of each other. And they were all very consciously working. I mean, there was a solid waste plant that could generated, some of the waste it generated could become feedstock for a company that was producing black soldier flies that produced fertilizer for an on-land fish farm that didn't involve open pen netting. So I think that Amsterdam, I think it adopted circularity as a conscious model. That I think is really important for the future. And it doesn't, in the apparel industry is not circular. Partly because of that, we're buying from huge mills.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Angus next, please. Angus.
Hi guys, my name is Angus Chen. I'm super excited to be here. As I share in the chat, I've been wearing this vest, Patagonia vest, for 28 years.
Oh, all right.
This vest was a birthday gift my wife gave me, and she got a better deal at the end for the long run. I really believe in Patagonia's philosophy. And at one point, I paid attention on the operation side, especially during the pandemic. At one point, you had the CEO's name, Rose Macarano.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
She stepped down as CEO. So I have two questions here. With such strong founder cultural company, how did you decide who will be a good CEO for the company? And the second, when you decide looking for the second CEO, the successor, what's your decision point? How does the incoming CEO will fit what you're talking about, which is a sustainable company for the coming 10 years?
Yeah. Thank you for being a good customer for 28 years. Wearing our best. The question you ask also begs a larger question of how do we bring in senior leadership into the company and help them to work within the culture? Because I think 15 or 20 years ago, the culture wasn't very integrated. And what happened is that every time we grew, every time the size of the operation grew, we'd have to put in new systems and we'd have to bring in people from other companies, larger companies who would work with those systems because our people didn't have experience with them. And then we would have a cultural shift, which the old people who had been there would think, do I still belong here because I'm being passed over? I'm not being given this interesting new role. Then the new people coming in would say, I don't know how to operate in this company. It's a very different culture from where I've been. So am I going to screw it up? And what I've seen at those different pinch points in the history of the company is it has taken 6 months or a year or so for people to find their feet, for the old timers to understand, yes, I'm still relevant to what I'm doing, and I'm learning new skills from the people we brought in, and for the people who came in, for them to start to understand how to operate in a very different environment from ordinary shareholder capitalism. It's also changed over the years. I mean, before 2003, 2004, there were no sustainability departments in business. There were no, when I hired the first environmental manager in Patagonia in 1992, I had to hire someone from a municipality, from the city of Irvine, because there was no one in business outside of oil and chemicals who did that work. So that's changed. In terms of the CEO, it's been more of, at each juncture where we've had a change, it has depended on the circumstances. When Rose got the job, she had been she came in as the chief financial officer. She came in from Silicon Valley in the venture capital world. She was a person who had to adapt to the culture. She said she came to Patagonia to see if it was real. And after a year or so, she decided it was, and she was a terrific influence on the company, especially in terms of operations, of getting clothes in on time and getting them out the door. When she left, we hired a fellow who had worked for us for 6 years running the European operation. So he was an insider. And even before that, he worked for Black Diamond, which is a company that was the original Chenard equipment. So it has been different each time, and I think the CEOs tend to be with us for 5 to 8 years or so, and I think it depends. The talents they have vary. Ryan, the current CEO, is a really good strategist, which it's good timing for that because we really are trying to figure out in the next 20 years. We want to come out of this being proud of what we're doing. You know, I didn't mention in the talk, you know, we thought that the latest thing we did environmentally was to work with nylon and polyester. We decided, oh, we're not going to use virgin oil in anything we do. And we're going to take 5 years. And in 5 years, we're going to come up with a nylon and polyester that performs equally well as virgin polyester, and will be net neutral or carbon neutral. So we succeeded. And then we looked at what we were doing. We said, no, we're not carbon neutral at all because this fabric is being made in mills that are fired by coal. So now we're working on a project with the mills to help get them to finance the transition directly from coal to renewables without going through natural gas as a second step. So everything we do in the next 20 years has to grow the business strategically as a business, but also to accomplish the next environmental and social steps. I mean, socially, we have a lot to do. Almost all of our products are fair trade certified, but we're not yet, apparel workers are not yet making a living wage.
Thank you very much. We have got 3 or 4 more questions to go. We have around about maybe 10 minutes at most before we finish the Q&A session. So maybe we move on swiftly to Susmit. Please, if you go next.
Hello. Hello, I'm audible?
Yes.
Okay. So my question is, Patagonia is known for their value-based hiring. So if you can share us some policies or employee-centric policies which they are working from the beginning till now, it would really help us.
And which policies would these be?
Employee-centric policies like
Oh, gotcha. Thank you.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. A lot of the, you know, we tend to stumble into virtue. I mean, what I described with organic cotton, you know, when we have the problem with the store, we had for a while when we got started, had a sewing shop. We were making packs, and women were bringing their kids in, and they were just sort of sitting there. And one child had colic and started crying all the time. So we said we need to have established daycare. Melinda Chenard said that. I was opposed. I thought we're too small a company. This is too expensive. I was wrong. The daycare, on-site childcare, made a huge difference for the employees because the parents could be relaxed at work, knowing that if there was a problem with the kid, they could go down and tend to them. United States has United States and New Guinea are the only 2 countries in the world that don't have paid leave for new parents. So our social net for supporting families is very small. So what the company provides is really important. So extended leave. If we have executives women who have to travel and they have a newborn, we send a nanny, we send someone with the childcare with them. We give people a lot of leeway in terms of when they show up to work and when they leave us, or as long as they get the work done. So those are primarily the culture. I think the culture has been really important for our success. Maybe the key element.
I'm not
trying
too sure
to
about
answer
the
the rest of the
whiteboard.
questions more succinctly.
That's
Maybe
all
we
from
can move on. Maximum 3 questions left now. So that first will be Radhika, then Mohammed, then Vikas. So Radhika, you first.
Greetings from Soil. So, my question is, what was the financial impact of transformation and how did Patagonia manage the cost of transforming it? Its impacts on sales and profitability, and how did they sustain it?
That's an impossible question to answer, actually, because we're talking about a long period of time. It's not that I think in the case of the organic cotton, it was as I mentioned, it was a 2-year period. And some of the activities that we've undertaken, we've had a kind of similar period of disruption and then a period of return to profitability after that. But for the company as a whole, I can't answer your question because it involves so much time. There wasn't a transformation that occurred over a limited period of time where I could talk about the impacts that occurred.
Okay. Thank you very much. If we move on then to Nilis. Mohammed, Nilis.
Hello, hi.
Maybe.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm here.
Please ask your
So,
question.
I just have, hi, my name is Mohammed. I'm from NELIS, 1 Million Leaders Program. And to be very, very short, if Mr. Stanley, if there's one actionable thing that business schools can do to make leaders more uh, approachable for climate more and to be well aware of being a sustainable leaders, what thing would you do throughout all of what you have done in your experience? That's a very short, straight to the point question. Thank you.
We're saving the most difficult questions for the last. I don't know about one thing. I think that I wish that business schools would look at more at the holistic impact of the company rather than think of business in terms of key performance indicators and also just in terms of return to shareholders. But there's already a move away from that, but I think business schools are actually behind the curve. And we'll be getting into that, I think, on the next step out.
Thank you so much.
We will. Thank you very much. Vikas, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Vincent, for all the great inspiration. This is Vikas from ESA. My question is, again, building on inspiration. So you have been through a long way, and creating a culture and values must have been also coming at some cost, some learnings. I would love to know where the leadership was tested in the process in this long history. And that again became an inspiration. Some moments or some incidents you might like to share, and how did you come out of it?
Oh, there have been so many. I mean, I think I mentioned the organic cotton. I think COVID was a challenge for us because we went remote for 2 years. You know, we shut the office down because we didn't think it was safe to operate. There have just been almost a constant stream, depending on what the challenge of the moment is. So I think I gave you one that was central to us, which would have been the cotton problem. That was almost existential for us. You know?
Sure. Thanks a lot.
I can see Francis Emmanuel. I can also see Tomo. Maybe Tomo, could you ask your question or comment first, please?
Vincent-san, thank you so much for your participation. I'm sorry to be late. I'm participating from Mumbai, India today. So my quick question is, if some of the participants in this session want to replicate the success of Patagonia, what kind of advice do you give to them? I'm personally very, very impressed by Patagonia, and I wish many more companies like Patagonia will emerge in the future. So what kind of advice, specific advice, if you give three advices, for example, what kind of three advices you give to participants?
I think primarily for a business that is giving back to society and giving back to nature, you want to identify right away what your purpose is. And that has to be something that's shared by the founding people in the company. If you're operating with stakeholder capitalism, where you view your responsibility to the health of the business, to your employees, your customers, communities you operate in, and to nature, if you do that, you can get very confused as to which entity you're responsible to first. So understanding that purpose helps give you a framework that is absolutely critical. And then the second thing is determine, one of the questions we had was, how did Patagonia approach its transformation? Well, we didn't, because we ended up retrofitting the company constantly over the past 50 years. So if someone is starting out now, I would advise them to find out, to figure out right away, what are your goals in terms of your social and environmental responsibility? What do you want to do first? What are the challenges of your industry that you want to solve? What are the opportunities you want to create for your customers? And think in those terms and organize your business strategy around that. Because otherwise there's always a tendency for business, as with NGOs, to have mission creep. So that's the basic advice I would offer someone who's starting out. Don't do as we have done. Start out from the beginning.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vincent. I know you've been talking now for over an hour. We do have Francis and Emmanuel that have had their hands up for some time. Is it okay? We have two last questions before we move on to the next part. Okay, then, Francis, over to you.
Thank you very much for your time, Vincent. So it's actually building on Tomo's question, and it's basically, what's the guiding philosophy that you are giving to your people so that when you stumble, you continue to stumble in the right direction and you continue to stumble in the right way?
Yeah. Well, we changed the mission statement about 5 years ago from the one I mentioned, which was three-part mission statement that everybody knew and everybody believed in and inhabited. And the new mission statement is, we're in business to save our home planet. And when I was having lunch with Elon, he told me that this is what he wanted to do. And I thought, here we go again. This is highly aspirational language. This is not the heart of the company. But I kind of trusted, on the basis of that first mission statement, that the culture would adopt it. And so the employees really did start to say, okay, how does my team approach the work we do in a way that helps to save a home planet? So that's it's pretty simple, and it's been effective so far.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And the final question goes to Emmanuel.
Thank you, Vincent Stanley, for the
good presentation so far, but why Patagonia is widely regarded as a leader in corporate responsibility and sustainability, it still faces challenges related to its supply chain, production impact, and the paradox of sustainable consumerism.
Yeah.
The company continues to take steps to improve practices that will benefit consumers and the society as a whole. My question is, how does the company ensure that its sustainable initiatives genuinely addresses the issues across its entire supply chain? In another word, how far do you also agree that irrespective of the good nature that Patagonia is doing, it is also contributing in the woes that they are facing?
Yeah. Well, we work very closely. At one point, we dealt with 150 assembly factories, and we thought we don't have strong relationships here. We don't know what's going on, and we can't work with them to solve problems. So we reduced it to 50 assembly factories. The partnerships that we have are really, really important. So I think that would be the shortest answer. I'll go back a bit, but since Roger's in Bangkok, they go back to the question about the spinners that wouldn't work with us. We finally found someone who ran one of the largest spinners in the world in Bangkok, and he figured out a way to cool the factory floor so that it didn't gum up his machines. And we asked him later on, we said his name was Johnny Young. And we asked him, why did you even talk to us? You were so big and we were so small. And he said, I guess you could call me a closet environmentalist. So I think the same kind of cultural change that we have been able to develop over time with the employees, we also have that with our suppliers. If we give our suppliers an opportunity to do business in a good way, they take it.
Thank you very much.
We also audit practices quite thoroughly.
Thank you so much for fielding so many questions. I do see one last hand. This is a really quick question comment. Maybe I can allow it, but we do need to move on to the discussion. So maybe a 5-second question and a 30-second response. Leah?
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to hear you from you. Thanks. And in your point of view, given the growing crisis of trust in institutions by the governments, corporations, or even NGOs, how can companies rebuild legitimacy and play a responsible political role without falling in?
I lost the sound there.
Yeah, I didn't cut you off. That was more than 5 seconds. I promise you I did not cut you off. But maybe just make it succinct as possible, please.
Okay, how can companies rebuild legitimacy and play a responsible political role without falling into the trap of greenwashing or corporate capture of social issues?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the things we try to do is to talk about issues where we really know what we're talking about. There's been pressure, I think, in the last 10 years for corporations to take more and more stands on issues. And there are some things where we have opinions, but they're really no better than the local taxi drivers. If we're talking about environmentalism or we're talking about climate change and all that, we have a long history. We have deep contacts, so we feel like we can speak with authority. So I think that's the main thing. We're now going into a time in the United States where greenwashing is behind us, and now it's green hushing, in which companies don't want to talk about the good things they do, so they don't get a target on them.
Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Vincent. You have not only provided a thought-provoking talk, but you've actually covered so many different areas in the Q&A session as well. Some of those we come back to now as we look at the future of business education. So I would like to go through and move on to the next part. And for that, we need a few slides, which are in the background. So if we can go through and provide that, I will go through and also introduce the discussant in a few moments' time as well. But if we can just return to the agenda, and then I will introduce Professor Fabrizio. Okay, so we're now on to part 2 of this evening session. We've got just under 45 minutes to go, and I will just have a slide talking about this slight pivot to the subject area today. Some of the questions and some of what Vincent has been saying actually do embrace the potential changes that business education might be going through. It could actually also be swept up in the wave of green hushing that you've just mentioned. So maybe different impulses that are there to go through and challenge the directions that many of us might like to see from the audience tonight. But as you can see from this particular slide, business school education has been around for quite a long time now. And there have been different times in that last 100 years or so where this subject area has come up for review and for discussion, not just in the 1970s, but before that as well. So we're now into the 21st century, and various forms of capitalism face different challenges from different perspectives, from different wings of different political parties, and not just in the United States, but for many other parts of the world as well. So how do business schools try to adapt to those geopolitical challenges, to the environmental challenges, the moral challenges that have been directly stated this evening, but also implicitly stated by some of the questions? So we'll move on to the discussion around this. Maybe, Vincent, I'll ask you just to say a few words about what you've seen in business education over the last 4 to 5 decades. You do work at Fordham University and other places at Yale as well. So what have you seen change in business education relating to the philosophy of being inclusive, looking at ESG, looking at all the different areas that you've just mentioned in your presentation? So maybe you can just say a couple of words, and then we'll move on to the discussant.
Yeah. Well, this is not a topic I know a lot about. I was not at I didn't go to business school. I've been working with business schools for the past 10 years, and the people who know things better than I do have told me that business education has not changed much in the past 40 years. So we're still dealing with the major transformation that went from managerial capitalism of the 1960s to the shareholder primacy of Milton Friedman. And for the most part, business schools are run at their heart by the finance and by the finance faculty, and other parts of the education are considered more extraneous. So in a time of facing major social and environmental challenges, I think business school, the actual curriculum does need to adapt to that. And I think one of the things we need is a sense of, I'm just going to make this case very briefly, a sense of humility. We've developed these sort of data-centric ideas that we can, if we develop the information, it's going to give us the moral direction inherent in the data. And it's not true. We're making decisions all the time in business that have a moral or political source. And I think we have to start to understand that. I mean, Mariana Mazzucato has done some interesting writing about that. Adam Smith was a moral philosopher before he invented modern economics, and I think some of that has to come back into business education. Most people don't start a business to make a lot of money. Most people start a business because they have a particular interest. There's a service or a product that relates to something they in the rest of their lives. And the actual practice of large-scale capitalism, of buying and selling companies, belongs to a very small part of the economy in some way, the real economy. Most people are employed by a different kind of company.
Thank you very much. I would now like to introduce everybody to the discussant this evening, Professor Fabrizio Ferreira. Just a very quick introduction. Fabrizio is the Professor of Strategic Management at AC Business School and Academic Director of their Institute for Sustainability Leadership. His research centers on the institutionalization of responsible and impact investing in the finance sector, with particular focus on shareholder engagement and how ESG criteria are integrated into investment practices. Professor Fabrizio's work explores the evolving role of investors in driving corporate sustainability, as well as the mechanisms through which responsible investing practices have become institutionalized, and the interaction between financial logics and social goals. So without further ado, I know that Professor Fabrizio will actually incorporate a survey asking the audience for some of their views on the role of business schools. I will now hand over to Fabrizio to continue.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Hello.
At the moment, yes.
You hear me? Yes. Thank you very much. I mean, thank you for inviting me again to share my thought, which, by the way, Vincent has already summarized very quickly. So actually, my goal was to go through a little bit of the history, because I think it's something that some of us are familiar with, but many people think that shareholder primacy is natural, is real. It actually started in the 1980s, and before that, it didn't exist. But before we go into that bit of a reflection on the role of business school, let's start with a little bit of a quick survey. I mean, actually, this is a Mentimeter survey. Can you see you can connect with your phone, menti.com, and use the code on top. This is just to get us started and see what is your first word that comes to mind when you think of business school and sustainability? Just one word.
Just to repeat that to those in the audience, if you could go to menti.com.
At the top, you can see the
74789295.
You just do it on your phone. You don't need to do it on the same computer. You can do it on another device, or you can do it on the same computer. Are you able to get in? If you are having trouble, let us know.
It seems to be working. It seems to be working. Let's see.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. So we have 27. Keep working at it. Yeah, this is just a quick sense for, that's interesting. You start to see that some of the winners are disconnected and necessary, which is an interesting duo. Responsibility is starting to gain more traction, and it's probably influenced by the conversation you just had with Vincent. I see some interesting one coming up as well. I think hypocrisy, lagging, buzzword. So a bit of, going with the trend, but not necessarily believing what is happening. So we're still missing a lot of you. So I think future is becoming more common. I think it's an important one because also, especially for many companies, this is about future-proofing the company as well. It's not just about the responsibility and the ethical need. So let's say, again, this is just to get us started, but I think not. You start to see, obviously, our relatively self-selected group that is interested in the future of capitalism. So it tend to have a more, I see more positive references than negative one, even though you could start to see that some are also negative. Let's go back. Let's say a little bit. This is a little bit more. So we wanted to get also to. This is a real poll where you have to agree, strongly agree or disagree. So it's a Likert scale poll. And this is about your experience in your business school about addressing, I use the word sustainability, but you can think of business in society, the role of business in society, corporate social responsibility. So all of this topic. And there are some specific questions regarding strategy and marketing, but most of them are more generic. Okay. Wow. So maybe we are too critical internally than you. So, but let's see how when more people vote, what do we get? So you can see as more people vote, we get a little bit of distribution and the averages. And I can see, so that I hope that you're all participating, even if your video is off. So we should be getting like 100 answers. How many people do we have? We are 47. Let's wait a few more seconds. And maybe if you can put the menti.com and the number in the chat, so perhaps some people can access it more easily there. So overall, I mean, the picture that's emerging is that there is, it's not so bleak as, sometime internally we criticize business school. It's a little bit slightly right of center. And as a strategy professor, I'm happy to see that it looks like strategy seems to be integrating sustainability more than marketing. We'll can discuss that later on when we open it up for question. I think there are very good reasons for that. I think actually some of our discussion, I could have added finance here, that probably would have been even lower in integration. But yes, this seems relatively consistent. So we have an average of 3.6 out of 5 for almost all the questions. Okay, let's move on. I mean, again, we're just gathering some basic information. Let's go a little bit more to the topic, and then we can discuss a little bit also the result from the survey. We can go back to it, but I'm very glad to be talking about this topic because this is something that has been very core to my personal research interest from a long time ago. When I wrote this article on how the assumptions of economics can become self-fulfilling even when they're wrong. So, and that's fundamentally, economics is fantastic social science, is based on relatively unrealistic behavioral assumptions. including rational decision making and self-interest. But and we wrote about this topic that even if in economics these assumptions are very useful to come up with good prediction at the macro level, they can have a negative consequences for the way we think about organization, companies, and management, leadership, and frankly, to even personal relationship. So this is a topic that has been explored much more by others after me. But I think when we go back to business school, why is it that business schools are often criticized for not bringing in sustainability? If you look at this historically, if you go back to the very beginning of business schools, so this is literally more than a century ago, business schools were actually started with the social mission. The goal was to actually make businessmen primarily, but business people more responsible, and it was perceived to be a calling. So almost you can see there are deans of Harvard, Columbia, Chicago here. So this was so central, for business schools at the beginning of their activity. But look at these statements. Business schools have been perennially criticized. So when do you think these statements were given? So when do you think this criticism was happening? Let me see if I can see the chat now. So anyone post this in the chat a year? Oops. I cannot see the chat anymore. Sorry about this. So this is from 1959. So as early as 1960, business schools were heavily criticized because fundamentally they were too focused on practice, or basically they really didn't have much to teach. So there were a couple of important studies done by two foundations that basically said, look, there is really much you can learn in business school, and students, good students, are not going there. The business school you're in today was born out of these projects in the 60s. So it's very much a post-World War II project. And it really came out of this Carnegie. Carnegie was probably the place where this was first implemented. And this revolution did two things. On the one hand, we now have a curriculum that is based on better science, better social science, but primarily economics. So the idea was we need to have a good curriculum to teach people, so it cannot just be, practitioner and, polish in school for practitioner. And where are we going to do that? Okay, we'll start from economics. But Herbert Simon, a Nobel Prize in economics, in this picture, very early on, is a Nobel Prize in economics. So let's clarify that his criticism of economics is from within. He was already very critical of how economics was actually taking over and was fundamentally ignoring the practice of management. Was very much based on armchair theorizing. And frankly, most business schools, again, Vincent was mentioning finance. I would say that was been definitely true in the US. And this definitely, became the dominant position in the 80s. So until the 80s, nobody spoke about shareholder primacy. The idea of agency theory that everything that matters is shareholder value was not dominant. The idea that you balance different stakeholder was what everybody was studying in business schools. Since the 80s, we have all assumed that, shareholder value is everything there is. And in some ways, the reason why we do that is that it's a very clever idea coming from efficient market hypothesis, coming from finance, that fundamentally all the other stakeholders are paid on a market, and that market is efficient. So frankly, no one should complain about their wages because it's an efficient market. The only residual claimant is the shareholders. So the reason why we should worry about shareholder value is that, at the end, it's the only one that is not getting a fair pay on an efficient market. Again, you could see there is a lot of assumptions in that chain of arguments, most of which are wrong. So these markets are not efficient, and therefore there is no reason why we should only worry about shareholders. This is not necessarily in the laws in most countries. It is in some countries, but it was put in the laws in the 1980s. So again, business schools are reflecting a broader shift towards financial markets that happened in the 80s. And today, again, this is what we believe in. So I was very glad to see that your view of business school is actually much less critical than the one that we actually get sometimes from inside. Andy Hoffman on the right is a colleague at Michigan. I mean, who has been also, he actually has an interesting book coming out next year on this topic from Stanford University Press. I will, suggest people read it. It's a very interesting book. And Duff McDonald has been a journalist, has been criticized heavily business schools by saying, we have given up on our role as educators. Again, I think this, I'm emphasizing, this criticism, I think, are exaggerated, I think. But I think it's true, as Vincent was saying, that over more than 100 years, as business schools, we went from a view of the firm as balancing the interests and needs of different stakeholders, where managers had a very important central active role in managing all of this, to a situation where managers are almost algorithms that are trying to just maximize one, value, shareholder value. And so the reality of most CEOs, they tell, that's not what they do, obviously. So the truth is that this is a view that we use in class sometimes, but it's completely inconsistent with what pretty much any CEO would tell you they do. Let me talk about my field, strategy, and again, and how the field also evolved over these years. So in some ways, I'm sure that we could do this for marketing. We could do this for every business school field, and we might see something similar. Again, once again, in the 60s all the way to the 80s, the core strategy course was called business policy, and it was about purpose. So purpose was the first thing you would learn in a business policy course at Harvard Business School and pretty much anywhere, including ESA. Since the 80s, purpose disappeared, and now it's appeared again as a concept, but it was there. So these are actual quotes from this book, Business Policy Texts and Cases. And it was always very clear that the strategy should be also socially responsible. And it's interesting, in the 60s, they were talking about, it is clear that a manufacturer of cigarettes might well consider diversification on grounds other than its fear of future regulation. So that didn't happen, by the way. So Philip Morris still does cigarettes. And they were actually putting it as a factual, obvious statement. Of course, a manufacturer of cigarettes in 1965 should consider divesting from it. Again, now this is a long time ago, but something happened in the 85, and again, Michael Porter, whom probably all of you have studied industry forces, and we do that, of course, at ESA, wrote a fantastic book. And if you want, many good things came out of this. Strategy has a much stronger framework today based on understanding industry economics, but we also probably assumed shareholder value, even though in our class, at least at ESA, we are very clear that it depends on, you could actually maximize many different things. But I think as a field overall, we always go back and take for granted that it is about basically performance in the financial market, maximizing shareholder value. Again, stuff like stakeholder theory has been around since at least the 80s. We integrated much more in our field in strategy, perhaps, than in other disciplines. But this theory has been consistently attacked because they say, oh my God, poor managers, they cannot optimize more than one thing. I mean, it's a very ridiculous statement because again, you actually as human, you can do definitely more than one thing at a time. And any practicing managers is always working on more than one priority. But this is the kind of argument that has sort of slowed down the development of this topic. Today, again, I'm going to close on this. We still have an open discussion, for instance, on how to integrate some of the more challenging problems. For instance, climate change. These are academic articles for this year, 2025. And of course, again, we're not going to go in details on this slide, but the arguments of many that think that we should change the way we teach strategy, for instance, are not just about profitability, but it starts there. We shouldn't just think about profitability and especially shareholder value as the only dependent variable. We should consider other aspects. But the most difficult challenge is probably how do we move from the corporate focus, which is essential to strategy because it's about corporate performance, to a more systemic view. And also, how do we move from competition, primary focus on competition, to one of collaboration? These are, I think, the three major challenges that, frankly, most strategy professors are dealing with. I think we have some ideas, and I think we have already experience in thinking about collaborations in innovation, in R&D, alliances. But I think in terms of the overall framework, we might still be so focused on corporate competition and sustainability that we might not be able to give the solutions that we need on especially some of the most challenging sustainability topics like climate change. I'll leave it here again, then we can perhaps use the Mentimeter tool if we want to get suggestion, Roger. But I would leave it at this point because I wanted to show how we have changed so much over, in different ways, both as business school and as a strategy field. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got 15 minutes for a discussion. I can see for Vincent that your morning is starting to go through and brighten up now, having joined us so early in the morning. So maybe we just have these 15 minutes to reflect on some of what's been said by the discussant and also by Vincent in the things that you've spoken about in terms of business schools being behind the curve, the need for having maybe a key people to imbue a sense of organizational culture that could be instilling a vision, a mission that might be lacking in some business schools. But maybe, Vincent, you'd like just to comment on what you've heard from Professor Fabrizio, and then we could have a few moments discussing a range of different topic areas about leadership in business schools, the topics, the courses which are being taught, the type of people that we're getting to teach now compared to the people that we might have taught 15, 20 years ago, because I think there's a change of the people that are in front of us in the classrooms, and also the role that AI and technology might have to play to make the situation better or worse. Over to you, Vincent, just a few comments.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the shareholder primacy actually, I think, works against strategy because it focuses on short-term stock price, and this has been talked about quite a bit. But if you look also at what the social and ecological impact of a business is, where in long-term objectives of a business actually align pretty nicely with long-term social and environmental objectives. But in the short term, that tends to be disruptive. It goes back to this sort of economy of scarcity, that in the short term, if you're solving a short-term problem and you've got to get that stock price up by the end of the quarter, you're going to make decisions that are not good long-term. So that I think that plays a part part in this. You mentioned Andy Hoffman's book, which I was just reading, and I think that that's going to be. He really did a wonderful job, I think, of outlining what the challenges are and also what the history is. So I would encourage everybody who has a chance to look at that, coming out from Stanford University Press next month.
Thank you very much. Maybe Fabrizio, turning back to you about the people that you've seen in front of you in the classroom over the last 15, 20 years. Do you see any changes? Because I've been teaching the subject for over 15 years, and I feel that maybe about 10 or 12 years ago, there was a bit of a change, particularly at MBA level. And I know you do MBA, you do executive MBA, you do corporate training as well. Do you see that there's a sense that the people in front of you are not hostile to the subject area? I felt that there was hostility in different countries around the world when I was teaching this in 2010, 2012. Now it's flipped, and very few students outside of the US seem to be opposed to teaching this. How is that in your experience, Fabrizio?
Yeah, I would say it has changed, but I think it remains. I think the attitude that I think it's emerging. I think Vincent spoke about denial. I actually see so much more denial now, or other forms of avoiding action, which is, of course, yes, all this, of course, all of this is needs to be done. But then every time you show example cases where people are doing something, people focus on all the many other things that are not being done. Like one of the questions today was, and I think, again, Patagonia and many other companies are serious about sustainability. They always start with the point that nothing is going to be sustainable. So maybe we should just all change the term and talk about responsibility and focus on the fact that these are not quick changes. These are, it takes a lot of work, and it's frustrating work, it's hard work, and it's not as fun as starting, an app company and get like VC money and flip it in 3-5 years. So there is something fundamentally, there's a fundamental disconnect with the pace of change that, and therefore even the gratification that you get in sustainability, by the way, but also in good quality strategic projects that take years, with the instant gratification that you might get in other realm of business activity. And therefore, I think both are happening. And many people say, oh, I want to do sustainability. Yeah, but, I want stuff that I can see results next month or 6 months, in a year. Okay, forget it. That doesn't exist. Then do something else. Become a trader. Do something that you can get, your quick fix today, because that's not how it's going to work. So I know it's a bit of a paradox. Yeah, there is more interest, more concern. I think unless you're really, again, unless you're really putting your head in the sand and you're really strongly ideologically driven, you realize major challenges in climate change. You might even notice that inequality is also a fundamental problem. But then I'm not so sure you're ready to act. So I still think that there is a lot to do in getting people, in creating the urgency to act and the patience to actually wait for the results.
Okay, thank you very much. Just maybe the word paradox has come up in the chat box quite a lot, about the paradox of trying to go through and address this in the traditional business school settings. I guess that this makes me wonder about the power of trying to nudge. What's the right way to nudge this subject area further forward? Is it stronger leadership, where you actually have a visionary leader that develops a culture within a business school which allows for this subject to go through and taught more rigorously? Is it related to just completely changing the curriculum? Is the curriculum at fault? Having a kind of a relatively siloed approach? Does there need to be more multidisciplinary studies that link these things together? Does it need to be more experiential learning? How do we get in front of the curve? Because this is a phrase that Vincent, I come back to time and again, that you mentioned a way that business schools, not just in this subject area, but in quite a few other subject areas, is criticized for being behind the curve. So how do we get in front of the curve? Is it a radical reformation of the curriculum? Is it a very different way of doing things? Is it giving students projects to work on, experiential learning? Is it the use of technology? Is it about trying to nudge behavior to be, I think, Fabrizio, you're talking really about that sense of denial. That's a cognitive dissonance where it's easy to go through and pass the blame on to elsewhere. Where does it take place? Is this reflection? Is this leadership? Is this new forms of teaching? Is it changing the curriculum? Where do we start?
Are you asking Vincent, me, or the students? Because we could do all of it.
Both of you to start off with, and anybody that'd like to comment on this in the chat box, because there's a parallel discussion that's been taking place in the chat box as well that I'm keeping my eye on. But maybe you and Vincent first of all.
Yep, Vincent.
I can say briefly, and I picked this up actually from Andy Hoffman's book, that I think a lot of change can come from the students. I think one of the arguments he's making is, yes, the system is broken. In business schools, go anyway, and then control your education. I know that the Center for Business and Environment that I work with at Yale was founded by the students, joint students in the environmental and the business schools about 15 or 20 years ago. So that's one way. I mean, I think it's going to be an all of the above approach. Probably changing the curriculum would be the slowest because there's most vested interest in continuity there. But if the students are ahead of the curve, then change can come from there. Not entirely, but the impetus, people will have to respond to what's in front of them.
Fabrizio?
Agree, and I think our experience at ESA has been very much like that. I would say, especially MBA students have been driving more changes this direction over the years. So I think that's a key piece. I still think that the core curriculum, especially in a 2-year program, should reflect a commitment to sustainability. Some of it in each course. So I guess we have been teaching the Patagonia case in the strategy course, in the core strategy course for many, many years. So this has been, we were not teaching Patagonia in a sustainability course. And we probably do it across all our degree program. I can see Agemba is now, is commenting on it. So we still probably do it. And we were doing it where Patagonia was not very well known. So just to give you an example, and we were using it as an example of differentiation strategy. So it was not just related to sustainability. It was, as we do Ryanair for low cost, we were doing Patagonia for differentiated, strategy. I still think that there is a little bit of technical knowledge. I think there are some that related to climate change, and I would say even social issues like inequality might not be easy to bring in the existing courses. And I think also political awareness. I would say one of the comments before, I think, also we often see that, again, we don't necessarily have a place where we develop the understanding of these challenges, geopolitics, again, corporate political responsibility. I mean, what you're seeing in the US, of course, Vincent, you already mentioned it. It's so outside of like any, it's coming out of dystopian science fiction movie. But again, we wouldn't want, so we don't want this to happen. So we need to do a lot more in terms of like understanding what political responsibility means, why inequality has all these bad consequences. And currently, I think we are a bit shy into making those changes in the core curriculum, both at IESE and I would say many other schools. Because we worry that, oh my God, so students are not going to have all the technical tools they need, and then they do the interview in investment banking, and they're not going to get that job. So I think there has to be. Roger was mentioning leadership and risk taking. I do think that there is a little bit of need for that. I think we are going in that direction, but I hope, with the help of the students, we might do more. I think that's where the students' help is very important. You don't change the core curriculum unless the students really think it's such a core issues to bring in. So
then maybe the final comment or the final question is that you mentioned about a pendulum that sort of swings from looking at social responsibility in the 50s, having some pushback in the 70s, back to sort of 2000s. This subject became much hotter to go through and focus on. Is there a danger then that the students that we get in the future, in the next 5, 10, 15 years, given the anti-ESG type movement, not just in the US, but in other parts of the world, and companies which are backtracking on lots of their commitments, are we seeing the next 10 years maybe pushback from students that in our classes as well, that we last saw 10, 15 years ago? And how do we overcome that if that's the case?
that's for me. That's
either. Well, this is the last comment because we're almost finished the time.
I think again, I worry. So there is probably bigger, more worrisome pendulum swinging towards 1939. So again, I think history. Again, that's why it's very important to bring history back, because. So again, I think if we continue in that direction, more towards again authoritarian governments, less democratic societies. Yes, obviously, this is something that will come with it. I don't think we'll go that far, but I think people are quickly realizing how bad certain choices they made at the poll will affect them in their daily lives. I don't think too many people that have a choice are really going to vote themselves into authoritarian dictatorship. And I would say most of our students come from, broadly speaking, democratic countries. I still think that makes our position as educators and even more important. And I think one of the first myths that has to be dispelled is that we are there just to provide technical ideas. And that the job of an executive is purely technical. It's not. It's political. It affects everything in society. Your choices as executives affect inequality in society. Your choices in HR practices affect distribution of wealth. Your choices in CEO pay affect all of these things. And so I think we have to have a more open discussions about this aspect of the MBAs, and students' education, because it's very easy to basically say, "Oh, I'm just there as as an executive. It's not my fault that we are now in a dictatorship." Well, maybe there was not only the voting part, but also the fact that maybe if we are more careful about the way we run our companies, we might avoid these changes. And that's why I think our position, because we're going to have many students with those tendencies, almost by definition, I think it's important to really have this discussion, try to understand why do you think it's a good idea, to destroy check and balances in democracy? Well, how is this going to help? I think we stay away from these questions. We say, oh, no, we're not going to touch this in class. Everybody has different politics. No. This is something we need to discuss, and we could have different views, and we can discuss them. But currently, we just don't discuss them.
Good. And some of what you've been said has been picked up in the chat box as well. Lena, looking at this in a sort of an optimistic way, positive way, looking at the hope that this type of perspective and from academics gives people as well. So thank you, Lena, for that comment. We're now out of time. I would like to go through maybe Vincent, give you the last moment to say final words on this subject area, and then we'll go through and wrap up. Over to you, Vincent.
Yeah, I would just like to reinforce from my experience what Fabrizio is saying. But I'd also say that it might be helpful to have a strong discussion in business schools about, to really concentrate on what is the purpose of the business. I mean, I think in Andy Hoffman's book, the Noble Purpose is part of the title. And then if you frame business activity in that way, then you frame it in the context of the larger, in the context of civil society and government. And you can start to have a discussion about how those three interact, because we're going to need all three forces acting in concert eventually in order to solve the problems we have. That has to be the long-term goal, to get out of this current sink we're in with the denial and with the attraction toward autocratic, if not authoritarian governments.
Thank you very much, Vincent, for a really thought-provoking and you said a series of things today which I think resonated with those that were listening to you. The close to 200 people here today that went through from different parts of the world, spanning many different time zones, and really do appreciate you in California. I hate to think about the time that you started the presentation today, but really grateful that you went through and gave up your time and your the thoughts that you gave around this subject area, hopefully with the way that this would inspire others and other companies to go through and emulate what we've seen at Patagonia. So thank you so much for your time today with us. I also think the questions that you received from the audience, you had some really diverse, often balanced questions as well, which I thought showed you their backgrounds and their interest in the subject area, which I find very heartening. Also for Professor Fabrizio's time with us today as a discussant. Thank you so much for the things that you were reflecting on that gets us to think about where business management education might need to go to in the future. And I do hope that it is future focused and that we are ahead of the curve before we retire from education. But thank you so much. I'm now going to pass over, I think, to Fernanda, who is the MC, who I believe is wrapping up the last moment. Is that right?
Correct, Roger. Thank you very
Great.
much.
Thank you.
I will be quick because I know we're over time already. Thank you very much for the session today. Thank you all for staying with us as well. And thank you for the participation in the chat. Oh my God, I'm reading it and trying to follow, and it's just so inspiring to see there are so many people on the same level questioning things. I think more and more we ask more questions or better questions. I think we're going to be able to address and give little steps towards this vision we have of a future capitalism, future of capitalism. Nancy, next, please. So I would like to remind you guys that our next session, which is the 9th session already, happens on April 1st. And it's going to be 1 p.m., which is the Central European summertime. Let's not forget that the clocks change this next weekend. And we will be talking about redefining corporate value creation. And we're going to have Pavan Sudev, the founder and CEO of Gist Impact and author of Corporation 2020. And Fabio Barbosa, the CEO of Natura & Co, cosmetic company that most of you guys probably heard of it. And we hope to see you all for this next session. And let's keep the level up, the super engagement up as well. And I thank you all again. Namja, I think this was the last slide, if I'm not mistaken. And that's it. See you on April at 1 Central European Summer Time. Thank you all, especially for staying with us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you guys.
Goodbye. Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Guys,
Thank you.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And bye.
Bye,
everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Fabrizio.
Thank you. Thank you, Vincent. Thank you, Tomo. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Vincent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.